We're going to be talking through and taking your questions on the biggest issues affecting your business. We're joined today by two of our Business Support Forum experts. Please say hello to Farina Azam, who is a partner at lawyers firm Kemp Little, and also Alan Bowen, who is legal advisor to the Association of Atoll Companies. And we're joined today by a representative from Abta. So thanks very much to John Vial, who is Director of Financial Protection and Financial Services. We're going to be focusing today on the ongoing issues around customer refunds, including the credit card chargeback scheme. But do ask the questions and add comments as we go, whether that's on Zoom or on Zoom. We'll try and look at those throughout the session. John, if I can come to you first. I know Abta has been working closely with government and really pushing over the last couple of weeks to try and get that relaxation on package travel regulations. After such a delay, is it starting to look like this will not come through?
It's a good question, and morning everyone, and thank you very much for the invite for this. So no, I think it's a work in progress. So we're most definitely not there yet with government. They've got their natural, I think, caution about doing anything that would be seen as taking away a consumer right to a refund within 14 days. So I think we've all got to be realistic. This is a big ask of government, and it probably goes against all their instincts in normal times. However, I think we've got real traction, a lot of support from the Department for Transport and the CAA, that this is a genuine crisis for our industry. This isn't a case of travel organisers choosing not to refund people on time. Members simply don't have the money. They've used that money to pay for flights, for hotels, for other services. So I think government has taken on board that this is a real crisis. And you mentioned chargebacks. I think they've also taken on board that exacerbates the crisis and makes it very time critical. But you can't escape the fact politically this is not an easy thing. And they're also faced at the moment with a directive that in theory they have to comply with as a member state, although we're seeing one after another of the other EU member states put that aside and change their domestic arrangements in different ways. So the battle is not won. Conversations are ongoing. They've been asking a lot of very sensible, detailed questions. Quite a complex process. We've got DCMS kind of championing the industry, ourselves as well as domestic hospitality. BEIS are very involved because BEIS at the end of the day lead on this. They own the Package Travel Directive and travel regulations in the UK. But a really key stakeholder are obviously DfT and CAA. So not an easy process at any level. Don't know the outcome to answer the obvious next question. I think it is uncertain, but we're working really hard at this and saying to government there really is no choice here. It is just a reality. Most travel organisers cannot refund their customers on time, so let's get this on a proper footing.
And there were three elements to your original request to government, weren't there, about extending the 14-day window to July 31st, ensuring that government confirmed refund credits would be financially protected, and then actually stepping in with a hardship fund in case I was unable to refund a tour operator. Are you having to flex at all on those three different elements, or is
no?
It would be those three elements.
Yeah, no, I mean they are the critical elements. Just a few comments, if I may, on the 31 July date. In fact, we've always asked government for a much longer regulatory window. And in fact, we've been asking for a window running actually to March 31, 2021, because we're only going to get one shot at changing the law. And whatever the concession is about the period of refund credit notes being valid, I think, in the real world for our members, we need this to give them freedom to get through into the beginning of next year, and whatever, what traditionally we've called peaks looks like, when hopefully consumer confidence will be returning and people are actually willing to redeem these vouchers, know what their plans will be. That window needs to carry them through to that. Within that window, the immediate step we took as Abta was to say, what can we do now, even if it's not actually got a legal basis, what can we do immediately that we can stand behind with our bonding system? And that's where 31 July came from. That covers both the people who are on March and September rules. We've got all the financial security in place, so we can actually credibly stand behind that. But we'd like to get that date opened up to members to get everyone through to the beginning of next year. Very helpfully, the DG Justice, who look after this at commission level, came out to member states at the beginning of this week with a statement as to the conditions for any arrangements that they would see as being acceptable. Now, they haven't changed the directive, and unfortunately, as with our Parliament, the European Parliament are not sitting now, so it's very difficult to actually get a change in directive, but the Commission have come out and said the conditions that would be required for a scheme to be acceptable. And the key one of that was that the domestic financial protection arrangements, the insolvency protection arrangements required by the directive, also apply to the refund credit notes. And it has to be time bound, and it has to link those back to the original protected booking. So we think what we've proposed complies with all of those things, and we're hoping that will weigh with government now that they've got that nod, if not a regulatory change, from Brussels.
Okay. And Alan, with all your vast experience, what do you feel is going to happen?
Well, I hope that we're going to get good news from the CAA. I mean, Abta's already said it will stand behind the vouchers if the product is protected by Abta, but it obviously needs the CAA to come out and say exactly the same. The difficulty we have at the moment is customers aren't convinced that a piece of paper is the same as an ATOL certificate. And without some assurance from the CAA, I think this is going to be a real issue. And hopefully in the near future, we will see movement. The fear, I think, is that nobody has ever protected vouchers in the past because vouchers are easily photographed, photocopied, they're subject to fraud, and therefore there has to be effective control of vouchers. If there is, then I think this is a real runner. I do agree that I don't think the 31st of July now is a realistic date. In practical terms, I'm not sure we're going to see much of a summer season at all, and therefore we need to push it further, much further into next year. And hopefully they will recognise that in truth, we're probably not going to be seeing any travel much before August, September. And we obviously need some cash coming in before, as operators, we can start offering anything, either holidays or refunds.
Mm. And how do you help your clients prepare at the moment then, Farina, as well, thinking about your tour operator clients? If we still don't have this clarity, are they preparing for both eventualities that the change will happen and that it might not?
I guess you have to, and I think whenever I'm advising clients, you have to make it clear to them that the law currently as it stands is a refund within 14 days of cancellation, and we are now coming up to that 14-day period for a lot of people. We've already surpassed it for some, and so my advice really is there's no doubting it's a really difficult situation and a very difficult message to be putting out to customers. So my advice really is, if you can hold on, it is worth holding on to see whether the rules do change and you will legally be able to offer the refund credit notes. But that advice really, obviously has to be caveated with the fact that you currently are in breach of the law as it currently stands. But also, it's very difficult to say, yes, the law as it stands is saying to refund all your customers, but if you can't afford to refund all those customers, if refunding all your customers is a surefire way of the company failing, then you have to be a little bit more pragmatic and a bit more commercial. And so my advice at the moment is to hold on and see whether the rules change. But I know that advice and that stance is getting more and more difficult the longer that this goes on, and customers are, I've seen some understandably very angry customer emails and customer comments off the back of this. And I'm not saying I don't understand customers' position, I do. So yeah, just fingers crossed that we can get this rule change and we can get it as soon as possible.
Yeah. And we had a couple of specific questions around the refund credit note system as well. Ed Pike from Simpson Travel wrote in to say, if we are using the Abta endorsed refund credit note system and will use this credit to book someone onto a 2021 holiday where flight schedules don't exist at the moment and therefore the ATOL certificate says TBA, can we apply a surcharge if the flights are released at a more expensive rate versus the original flight price? Any thoughts on that one?
That's a good question. So there's no problem selling it as a flight-based package. You know, it's a regular thing that everyone has to do, that the flights may not be confirmed. So that as an ATOL protected product's not an issue. Just hooking back on this, because it's a good moment to do it, I hope. Alan's comments about vouchers, he's absolutely right. And that is precisely why these things are refund credit notes. They're a document that evidences a refund due. They're not a voucher. And that's a very important part of this in our discussions with government and with the CAA. So the existing CAA payment policy, the Air Travel Trust payment policy, for those of us on this, sad enough to look at these things, it's section 4.2, have always covered a refund due that was outstanding at the time of the failure of a company. So what we're doing here is, it's a piece of paper, it's evidence of a refund that remains due on the original booking, and that's why it falls within the ATT payment policy. Now, Alan's right, CA are very nervous about confirming that protection, because actually the issue for them is they really don't want, and DfT really don't want, to be out there condoning a period of refund due that goes beyond the current regulations. That's very difficult for a government agency at the end of the day. But if you ask the question, are refunds covered under the ATT payment policy? Yes, they are. There's no issue there at all. So come on to the price issue. Well, this arises for tour operators anyway, you know, every day of the year, where you're putting a flight in, or flight only sale for that matter, and you don't have a confirmed price. So that comes down to the normal rules, frankly, under contracts and PTRs as to how you handle that. And it's an unknown component cost. So that's normal business. That's not really a function of the COVID crisis. Pippa, I for one can't hear you right now.
I can't hear you.
No.
Muted myself.
Ah.
Am I back?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
I'm sure it's a good question.
Ed, the second part of Ed's question was, well, what do you think about the current surcharging rules, especially in light of the highly unknown 2021 situation? Will we have to follow the 8% max with 2% absorbed by the tour operator?
I think the answer to that is yes. I really can't see them changing that.
And any further thoughts, Farina and Alan? You agree on that?
I
agree.
Yep, definitely. They're not going to change anything else. We'll be lucky if we get the 14-day rule changed. I think it's asking too much to expect lots of other alternatives to be changed as well.
Something we've had several questions in about, and just have one here on Zoom as well, actually, is the whole chargeback scheme, because obviously, as well as applying to their travel company for a refund, consumers can apply via their credit card provider. Alan, we were chatting about this. Can you remind us what the law is on the credit card chargeback scheme, exactly how that works?
Well, fundamentally, the chargeback is supposed to operate where it is alleged that the supplier, the agent or operator, is in breach of contract or is negligent and hasn't provided the service which is being paid for. I think the situation is different between agents and operators. If you, as an agent, have sold, for example, a flight and you've got decent booking conditions, it should say that the contract is with the airline. Now, in that situation, I think you can defend a chargeback on the basis that the airline is the company with whom the customer has a contract. The airlines, of course, are not being our friends at the moment. I mean, the whole issue arises because they're deciding to hold on to their funds and not paying anything back. I think the situation is more difficult with operators. I know that there have been discussions with UK Finance, and they were reasonably supportive, I think, at least initially. But I have seen emails in the last 7 days from major card processors saying, unless your booking conditions say that you will offer a credit refund as opposed to a refund, we would not be able to defend a chargeback, and we would have to allow it. Now, of course, nobody's booking conditions make any mention of refund vouchers, because we've never been in the situation where they've been necessary. So I think the real danger, which operators are going to have to look at very carefully and make sure they defend every single one of them, is that money gets sucked out of your bank account very quickly if you don't respond within the 7 or 10 days that the bank give you to respond to a request for chargebacks.
Right. And they just go and take it automatically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pippa,
yes.
Just add to that. So Visa and MasterCard, who obviously administer the two schemes, put out some actually quite helpful guidance on dispute resolution during the COVID crisis on the 27th of March. Quite happy to share that with you to forward to those on the call if you have the mechanism to do that. But they specifically in that guidance acknowledge that refund credit vouchers are a reasonable alternative, is the phrase that's used in payments ecosystem, as they call it rather grandly, world. I think it's really worth participants having a look at those guidance, because it gives some really good insights onto the basis for which you can put the challenge back up on the chargeback coming through the system. Very similar, Visa and MasterCard, slightly different phrasing, but well worth having a look at those.
Just to add to that point as well, there might be other things within the Visa and MasterCard, the card terms, that are worth looking at and including in any chargeback defence as well. So one particular example I'm aware of is in the MasterCard terms. If you offered customers insurance and they said no, then and that insurance would have covered them in this particular situation, then that's one way that you can then defend that chargeback with the MasterCard terms. I'm not sure if there's anything similar in the Visa ones, but there may well be. So my advice to clients is, check the MasterCard and Visa terms, see whether there's anything else in there. And similar to what Alan was saying, my advice is respond to those chargeback claims, don't sit on them, get your response sorted. And actually, I have been helping some clients prepare draft responses that can then be sort of pulled into every single response. And yeah, if you're an agent, there is a defence there for the Section 75 chargebacks, that you're not the supplier. And for a Section 75 chargeback, you need to have the supplier in that transaction. But that will come down to the agent, making sure that agency status is clear. So you'd be looking at providing evidence as well. So your terms and conditions that say you act as an agent, your booking confirmation that names who the suppliers are, and then amongst that, creating that draft response that makes it very clear why this is not valid for a Section 75 chargeback. And then for the operators, it is more difficult, but it is responding to each one, making it clear what's been offered, whether the customer has accepted any kind of a credit note or a partial refund as well, because then they wouldn't then be entitled to a full refund of the entire amount on the card payment either. So making it clear whether there is anything else in the MasterCard and Visa terms that might apply, and making it clear that you haven't just ignored a customer, you haven't just breached your contract, you have been trying to come to a resolution. And really, the key is to respond to each chargeback claim and really try and argue against it.
Don't sit on them for a few days. Actually do interact and make it look like you've tried. Good advice. What about debit card side of things as well? I know that it's not guaranteed protection, is it? Card payments, but is that almost as big a concern as the credit cards?
Practical terms, yes. Different legal basis, but it flows through the credit card networks in a very similar way. So yes, it is effectively. Yeah,
and so post Thomas Cook collapse, do we see that just as many consumers were able to claim back through debit cards as credit cards, or is it a smaller proportion really?
I can't say on the proportions off the top of my head, Pippa, but the principle was exactly the same. So yeah, in practice, doesn't make a great deal of difference.
It's difficult to look much beyond the next few weeks right now, isn't it? But one thing that the crisis has highlighted, and everybody agrees, that package travel regulations weren't really built for a situation of this nature when the entire industry comes to a standstill. And some have said that shows the merits maybe of a trust fund model instead, where a client's money is entirely ring-fenced. And what are your views on that, and how do you think financial protection might have to change as a result of this?
Well, if I kick off, the trust fund model, I think, to be honest, in the vast majority of them has many of the same problems. So one of the things that most of the trust funds allow, trust accounts allow, is prepayments to suppliers. Now, historically, the basis on which prepayments to suppliers was allowed is there's some form of SAFI insurance in place if that supplier failed. And in normal circumstances, that's absolutely fine. But we're not, certainly not so far, actually talking about a supplier failure issue. We're just talking about a systemic inability of suppliers, airlines included, to refund back down the stream. So the trust funds, same as ASOL, same as Abta members, have got the really the same problem. You don't have 100% of the consumer prepayment in the majority of those arrangements to be able to refund the customer when the supply chain hasn't reimbursed the trust account. Now, I'll be very cautious because there are people that do it on different bases, but in the majority of cases with trust, they've got exactly the same problem that the tour operators do. And everything that we as an industry are doing, and we're working very closely with those guys, with ATO, with CPT, with Aptos on this. The nuances are slightly different, but the fitness for purpose, it just doesn't work in this crisis that affects every destination. We all have exactly the same problem, and none of those systems are immune from that systemic risk.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to look at the way the travel industry works in its entirety. I think Thomas Cook's produced lots of things that we'd never thought of before. The fact that full payment was being collected when deposits should have been collected, resulting in huge losses for many, many principals who thought they were subject to a loss of a deposit and discovered the entire money had gone. That, of course, has weakened most of the industry, which is not what we want right now, because they're already in a more difficult position than they would normally be. And I think we need to look very, very carefully at the whole ring fence of how we protect customer money. I agree with John. Trust accounts will only work where the funds sit there until the holiday is over. And very few agents or operators could actually afford to buy all the product that they need in order to give the customer the holiday without touching the customer money. And therefore, I'm not sure that trust accounts are the answer for everybody. They are for some people. But I mean, I know one agent who set up trust accounts in the 1990s. They physically had to put in £13 million of their own funds on day one in order to account for all the money which they previously collected. And it's very, very unlikely that many companies could do something like that. And the amounts now would probably be even higher. But I think we need to fundamentally look at the way that the system works. The package travel regulations, even though they were only drafted a few years ago, only became effective 2 years ago, I think this historical, and I hope it is historical and never to be repeated event, is something that we could never have planned, never considered. Nobody could imagine consumer paralysis, which is what we have at the moment. And I think we need to look very carefully at the whole way the industry works, not just financial protection, but everything that follows from that, the way the system works, the fact that airlines have simply frozen and refused to offer a penny, and yet still look to tour operators to give customers their money back. The system doesn't work. We'll have to look at a new system in the future.
Pippa, are you muted again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Strange. Sorry about that. Just asking if you'd agree with that, Farina, or feel slightly differently. Yeah,
I mean, I think Alan and John have covered off all the points there, but I think in terms of just touching on Alan's point about the PTRs, they just, no one could have envisaged something like this. You know, you can't draft law or terms and conditions or contracts with every single eventuality in mind anyway, but you would never have expected there to be a situation where the entire world essentially shuts down. All countries have put restrictions on travel, whether that's outward, whether that's inbound. Normally you'd have a situation where one destination might be affected, but everything else can carry on as normal around it. But this time we have a situation where the entire world is affected, and you just can't, you can't draft laws for something like this. You can't draft contracts or terms and conditions for something like this because you just never knew that it could happen.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions coming on Zoom that I'll try and rattle through. One of our guests mentioning that the lack of clarity is proving a strain on relationships between operators and agents, where agents are requesting a refund for those customers that will not accept a credit note. What is the interim solution? Do we look at tours affected by the suspension of travel and offer a credit note only with a review to look at refunds when there is clarity? Or do we have to face damaging relationships if not being seen to adhere to current PTRs? Yeah, I guess that's the challenge we've been discussing, really, isn't it? There is no easy answer in those circumstances.
No, that's right, Pippa. I think it's just a reality, isn't it? It's not a question of choice for many travel organisers, simply haven't got the money. But, you know, the question is absolutely right. That's damaging relationship between parties in the industry and even more importantly with consumers. So I think you've only got to look at the consumer journalists and their commentary. Interesting piece from Simon Calder in The Independent today, where he's really moved his position, and you kind of watching the consumer journalists as well realise that however they might normally feel about what's happening, there is a recognition there that this is just a fact, and that the industry's trying to do a decent job of managing it in a way where the consumer's right might be delayed, but it's not taken away. And it's my colleague Simon Bunce has been using the phrase, you know, there's consumer rights and then there's consumer interest. And, you know, the industry can't meet all of the consumer rights right now, but it really is looking after the consumer interest, because if everyone falls over, it's going to take a lot longer for the consumers to get their refunds through the ASL and Abta systems than it would be if we get this regime on a proper footing. And it is that simple now.
You're muted again, Pippa.
Am I back?
Yes,
Wow.
you are.
I think it's maybe when I click into the question, sorry about that. A listener mentioned that their clients are questioning the refund credit notes because Abta has not referenced that they are backed by ATOL protection on their website. Is that the case? You've not been able to state it explicitly.
Well, it's, as I say, it's a really difficult one for the CAA. They've been really supportive on this, got, you know, a huge amount of time for what they're doing behind the scenes on this, and DFT, but they're in a very difficult position. They're, you know, a government agency, and to come out and say it's okay not to comply with the regulations is a really difficult thing for them. Having said that, have a look at the ATT payment policy, section 4.2. They're very clear that refunds are covered. A refund due when a company fails, if that's a normal refund, I'm not talking about compensation or ex gratia payments, anything like that, cancelled booking and a refund due, it's always been covered under their scheme, and indeed ours. That's normal business. But in fairness to the CAA, I think it's a really tough thing for them to come out and say that before there's a change to the actual regulations. But it's there for anyone to look up to. It's public domain. You can show it to customers if you wish. Mute again.
Oh my goodness.
There we go.
Another listener has asked, what would the differences have been if we were under the 2016 package travel regulation rules?
Wouldn't it be?
No? It would be exactly the same.
No. The reality is you can't get blood from a stone. It didn't matter whether it happened today or 10 years ago. When the money has left the tour operator, we can't give it back. I mean, it's as simple as that. And that's the fundamental problem right now. I know there are some people saying, well, you should have so much money in your own pocket that you can give refunds because you're living on other people's money. But unfortunately, that's the way the industry has worked for 50 years. It can't change overnight. It won't change overnight. We have real problems with the airlines. They are fundamentally the core issue because they're not giving refunds. We've got other suppliers abroad who have no income coming in, so they've got no money to give back either. That's the reality. And I think, unfortunately for agents, it's very difficult because they may be finding it very difficult to explain that to the customer. But, you know, it really is the truth. I mean, the words I use for my clients is delay repay. Now, those are the words that the railway companies use when they're giving you compensation. But what I'm saying is we need to delay until we can repay. And that's the only way we're going to get through this, because if everybody wants the money now, it's not there. So they can either have something in the future or an alternative holiday, or they can demand the money now. The first 10 people get it, the remaining 100 people don't, because the business has gone bust. It's as simple as that.
On a slightly different note, we had a few other concerned agents write in. I'm not sure if you'll have any particular advice for them. We've had an individual who works for a tour operator as an independent travel consultant who says the tour operator is sitting on the client's money, it's about £14,000 worth, and the client has requested a refund. The individual knows that the operator has not passed that money on to the supplier yet, and they're now at loggerheads with their employer because the operators sort of took them out of the system, they've fallen out over it. Can the operator do this? I suppose it's at the operator's discretion whether or not they're paying those refunds or not, but it's a more of an employment issue, really, I guess, if they've been locked out of the system in that sense.
It's the relationship, I suppose, between the independent contractor and the company they work for. And frankly, you know, if you know something and you're not happy about it, then maybe you should be looking at how your relationship continues in the future. I mean, I don't know how they can say they are certain that the money hasn't been passed on, because I'm not certain that a tour operator will discuss with an agent exactly what they're doing with the funds at any one time. So it may be an assumption the money hasn't gone. That may not be a correct assumption.
I think it's another agent, possibly the same operator, I'm not too sure, who says they're currently owed commission and their employer's refusing to give them their commission due. Any advice in that situation? I mean, it does happen sometimes, doesn't it, that agents end up not being paid commission due to them in various circumstances. Any specific tips?
Look at the terms that you agreed to at the time you signed up to the company. Many of them will say if the holiday isn't going ahead, then the commission is returned anyway, so you're not entitled to it. It really depends, I think, on the terms that you've agreed. So I don't think there's an easy answer there. And obviously, a lot of holidays have been cancelled. A lot of tour operators have already paid commission and aren't finding it very easy to get the commission back. But if you're working as an independent contractor for a franchise or whatever, then of course it's very easy for them because they simply don't pay you in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Question from Thomas Parsley here on Zoom. Regardless of any delay or alteration to package travel regulations and refunds, we will need liquidity, i.e. hard cash, into the system at some point to meet these refund requests. Where is this coming from? He asks. I guess that's, yeah, again, more of an exasperation rather than a question for you guys. But what are you advising clients to do in terms of how they can get their hands on some cash and be cutting costs and whatever to try and make sure they've got a little bit of cash flow at the moment?
Well, I guess the first thing, Pippa, is that people are going to have to create this window so that we can actually get the refunds coming back through the supply chain from airlines and others. There are the government schemes, and it's a positive thing this morning that the government have made quite a substantial change to those to open it up for companies with turnover greater than 45 million. So there are lots of issues with those schemes, and there's been what looks like some pretty, let's say, poor in terms of supporting society behaviour by the banks around their conditions for the 20% of the loan that is on risk. Heard all the stuff about personal guarantees being asked for by smaller companies, which, all right, has now been gone away for loans under 250,000. But there's clearly all sorts of issues with those schemes. But those schemes do provide a route to additional liquidity lending. Now, that's not without its questions, because that involves taking on debt. It's going to have to be repaid. The CAA and we will have to work with the companies on that for future renewals. So, you know, none of this is free money, but I think it's, you know, it's the combination of shareholders, of lending, of the refunds coming through the system. And again, that's why we need to create this window with the refund credit notes, so people can work through all that stuff to give them a fighting chance of actually surviving this.
Do you have any predictions any of you about what we might hear from the Chancellor this evening? We're expecting some more updates from him today, aren't we?
Well, it would be nice if you were to suggest that there should be a limit on the rate of interest that banks are charging. Some of my clients have been to the bank, apart from the personal guarantees they were looking for from the directors, they were looking for 30% interest. You know, that's not a realistic situation at any point. I mean, I think this is the time when you need to have made sure you've had a very good relationship with your bank. Some people do, some people don't. But if you go to a bank with no previous experience of them, you're going to find life very difficult. And there's no getting around that. I mean, the banks are not in a financial disaster space as they were in 2008, but they're not making things easy for the travel industry. Because I think, unfortunately, they decided that we are a very risky business to effectively invest in.
We've had a lot of readers frustrated with the measures for the self-employed that were announced as well, and just how many people fall through that net in various ways if they, you know, their earnings are too high, or they have a director, or they haven't done a tax return recently enough. And John, is that something that you're talking to government about as well? Do you think there's any prospect of some amendments to those measures to try and help more people out? Because those individuals aren't alone, are they? It's
no, not at all. Yes, we have. Luke Petherbridge, our head of public affairs, has been leading on that with Department for Business and ECMS. We've got a lot of self-employed people in the industry in all sorts of different parts of it. I can see it personally in terms of what's been coming through to Abta Lifeline. It's a sad analogy, but it's for Abta Lifeline at the moment. It's a second wave after Thomas Cook of people in our industry coming through for help. And actually, one of the most tragic parts of this that we've been watching there happen is actually some of the former Thomas Cook employees who went as personal travel agents, who are absolutely in that category of people that don't have a full year. They haven't filed accounts yet, haven't done a tax return because obviously it's just 6 months from the failure of Thomas Cook, and that they are spot in that category of self-employed people that don't qualify for the current arrangements that government have put in place. So yeah, we are lobbying on that. Really difficult to assess the chances of any progress there, because I think there are just so many people across all sectors in that situation.
And there'll be special circumstances in other sectors perhaps as well. That Jenny Jackson's just joined us and asked a question along similar lines, really just how badly they feel like they've been stabbed in the back, those Thomas Cook former employees, and they don't really know where to go from here. Okay, I think we've got through all of the questions that we've had in from our readers and live in the Zoom chat as well. So I will draw it to a close there, but Alan and Farina are very much on our business support forum at ttgmedia.com. So if you've got any further questions, then please send them our way, and might be able to get some further help from them for you. And big thanks as well to John for joining us today as a special guest. I know you're incredibly busy. Thank you very much, panelists, and thank you to everybody that joined us. Hope you found that helpful, and join us again next week when we'll be taking some new questions on whatever new challenges have appeared or continued in the intervening weeks. So thanks very much, everybody, for joining us, and take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.